I never thought I'd become one of those old men you hear about on the internet. You know the stories. A father spends his whole life working, sacrifices everything for his family, and then one day his own children treat him like yesterday's newspaper. I always believed that would never happen to me. I was wrong. I'm 71 years old, a retired electrician from Ohio. I spent 43 years climbing ladders, fixing wires, and working overtime so my family would never struggle. My wife, Linda, passed away 6 years ago after a battle with cancer. Losing her nearly destroyed me. After the funeral, my son, Mark, became my entire world. He was 42, married, and had 2 children. I thought we were close. At least, that's what I believed. A few months after I retired, Mark started visiting more often. At first, I was happy. He'd bring coffee, ask how I was doing, and help me mow the lawn. "Dad," he said one afternoon, "you shouldn't be living alone at your age." I laughed. "I'm old, not helpless." He smiled. "I know. I just worry about you." Hearing that made me feel loved. Then he started talking about money. "Dad, have you figured out your retirement investments? Scammers target seniors all the time." I admitted that I wasn't great with computers. That was true. My late wife had always handled the online banking. Mark offered to help. "I'll organize everything for you. It'll make life easier." I trusted him completely. Why wouldn't I? He's my son. Over the next few months, he gained access to all my financial accounts. I didn't think twice about it. Then strange things started happening. He'd ask questions like, "How much is left in your retirement account? Did mom have any other savings? Is the house completely paid off?" At the time, I assumed he was just looking out for me. I couldn't have been more wrong. One evening, he and his wife came over for dinner. They looked nervous. "Dad," Mark said, "we're having some financial problems." I felt my stomach sink. "What happened?" His wife started crying. Apparently, they had credit card debt, medical bills, and were behind on their mortgage. Without hesitation, I offered to help. That's what parents do. I gave them $20,000. Every penny came from my retirement savings. They hugged me and promised to pay it back. I never saw that money again. A few months later, they needed more help. Then more. Then more. Each time, there was another emergency. I started dipping deeper into my retirement fund. I told myself I was helping my family, but I noticed something strange. Every time I visited their house, there was something new. A giant television, a luxury grill, an expensive vacation, new furniture. Yet somehow they were always broke. I tried not to think about it. Then came the day everything changed. I logged into my retirement account. The balance looked wrong. Very wrong. Nearly $200,000 was gone. I thought there had been some mistake. I called the bank immediately. The woman on the phone asked a question that made my blood run cold. "Sir, weren't these transfers authorized by you and your son?" "My son." I nearly dropped the phone. "What transfers?" She listed them one by one. Large withdrawals, account transfers, electronic signatures, all under my name. I couldn't breathe. I drove straight to Mark's house. When he opened the door, I held up my bank statements. "What is this?" His face turned pale. For a few seconds, he said nothing. Then he sighed. "Dad, I can explain." I had never heard a sentence that made me angrier. "Explain how you stole my retirement?" He looked annoyed. Actually annoyed. "You weren't using the money." I stared at him. "I'm sorry, what?" "You have enough to live on. My family needed it more." I felt like I had been punched in the chest. That money represented 43 years of hard work, every overtime shift, every holiday I missed, every aching joint, and he acted like it belonged to him. I demanded he return every penny. Instead, his wife stepped forward. "Mark is right. You're old. What do you even need all that money for?" Those words hurt more than the theft. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told them I was going to the police. That's when my son said something I'll never forget. "If you do that, don't expect to ever see your grandkids again." Silence. He was blackmailing me, using my grandchildren as weapons. I left without saying another word. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat alone in my living room, staring at old family photos. I kept asking myself one question. How did my little boy become this man? The next morning, there was a knock on my door. I opened it. Mark was standing there, but he wasn't alone. He had 3 large boxes in his hands. And the first thing he said made my heart stop. Dad, you need to move out of this house. I just stood there, staring at my son. Dad, you need to move out of this house. For a second, I thought I had misheard him. What are you talking about? Mark let out a long sigh, like I was the one making things difficult. We've decided it's best if you move into a senior living community. The kids need more space, and honestly, you shouldn't be living by yourself anymore. I looked past him and saw his wife standing by their car, arms crossed. This wasn't a conversation. This was a plan. You decided? I asked quietly. Yes, he said. We already found a nice place for you. I couldn't believe it. They had already made arrangements before even speaking to me. I am not moving anywhere. Mark's expression hardened. Dad, don't make this harder than it has to be. Harder? The man who stole my retirement savings was telling me not to make things difficult. Then he said something that made my blood boil. You can barely manage your finances. That's obvious now. I almost laughed. He had drained my accounts, and somehow I was the irresponsible one. He held up a folder. I've got paperwork. We can transfer everything today. I looked at the papers. There was an application for an assisted living facility and several documents giving him control over my remaining assets. I felt sick. This wasn't concern. This was a takeover. I slowly closed the folder. No. Mark's face changed immediately. The caring son disappeared. Dad, be reasonable. No. You need help. No. His wife finally walked up. You're being selfish. Selfish. I had given them nearly everything I had, and now I was selfish. I started to shut the door. Mark stuck his foot in the way. If you won't move willingly, we'll make other arrangements. I looked directly at him. What does that mean? He didn't answer. Instead, he turned around and walked back to the car. I watched him drive away. For the first time in my life, I felt afraid of my own son. The next morning, I woke up to several missed calls. One was from my bank. Another was from a lawyer's office. Then I saw a text from Mark. We need to talk. It's important. Asterisk, asterisk. I ignored it. An hour later, there was another knock at my door. This time it wasn't my son. It was a police officer. My heart nearly stopped. Sir, we received a report that your family is concerned about your mental condition. What? The officer looked uncomfortable. They believe you're unable to care for yourself and may be experiencing confusion. I couldn't believe it. My own son had tried to convince the police that I wasn't mentally competent. Thankfully, the officer could tell I was perfectly fine. He apologized and left. But I understood something very important that day. This wasn't about helping me. They wanted control, and they weren't going to stop. That afternoon, I drove to my lawyer's office. I hadn't spoken to him in years. His name was Richard, and he had handled my estate planning when my wife was still alive. The moment I sat down, he knew something was wrong. I told him everything. The stolen retirement money, the threats, the attempt to force me out of my home. He listened quietly. Then he asked a question. Did you ever tell your son how this house is legally owned? I blinked. No. Richard nodded slowly. Interesting. I frowned. What do you mean? He opened an old file cabinet and pulled out several documents. Then he slid them across the desk. I looked at the papers, and suddenly I remembered 6 years earlier, after my wife died, Richard had suggested creating a special estate arrangement. At the time, I barely understood it. I had simply followed his advice. Richard smiled. Technically speaking, your son cannot force you out of that house. Why? He tapped the documents. Because you don't personally own the house. I stared at him. What? The property is held inside a family trust that you control. I blinked again. A family trust. Then it hit me. My wife had insisted on it years ago. She had worried that if something happened to me, someone could manipulate me into signing away the house. I remember laughing at her. Linda had always planned for every possibility, even this one. Richard leaned forward. And here's the important part. I swallowed. Your son doesn't know any of this, does he? I slowly shook my head. He smiled. Then he just made a very expensive mistake. For the first time in weeks, I smiled too, because I suddenly understood what had happened. Mark believed I was the owner of the house. He assumed he could pressure me into signing it over. He had no idea that legally there was nothing for me to sign. The house was protected by my late wife. I looked down at the documents and whispered, "Linda, you did again." Richard handed me another folder. "There's something else you should know." I opened it. Inside were records showing every transfer from my retirement accounts. Every single one. Dates, amounts, electronic signatures, evidence. Enough evidence to destroy my son's entire story. I looked up. What do I do now? Richard folded his hands. "That depends." "On what? Do you want your money back?" I nodded. "Or do you want justice?" I thought about my son's words. "You're owed. What do you need all that money for? Asterisk, asterisk." I remembered him threatening to keep my grandchildren from me. I remembered the police officer standing at my front door. And I finally realized something. I had spent my entire life protecting my son. Now it was time to protect myself. I looked directly at my lawyer. "I want both." Richard smiled. "Then let's make a plan." At that exact moment, my phone rang. It was Mark. I answered. He sounded cheerful. "Dad, good news. We found the perfect place for you. We'll start moving your things tomorrow." I looked at the trust documents in front of me. Then I smiled, because my son had absolutely no idea what was coming next. I looked at my lawyer and answered the phone. "Hello, Dad," Mark said cheerfully. "We'll come by tomorrow morning and start packing your things." I almost laughed. He was already planning my eviction from a house that wasn't even mine to give away. "Tomorrow won't work for me," I said calmly. There was a pause. "What do you mean?" "I've been busy today." "Busy doing what?" I glanced at Richard, getting legal advice. Silence. Then his voice changed. "Dad, why would you do that?" "Because someone stole nearly $200,000 from me." He immediately became defensive. "We already talked about this." "No, Mark, you talked. I listened." "Dad, don't make this into a big deal." Too late. It already was. I ended the call. 10 seconds later, my phone rang again. I ignored it. Then came another call. And another. By evening, I had 37 missed calls and dozens of text messages. "Dad, please call me. You're overreacting. We can work this out." The last message made me smile. "Please don't do anything stupid." I wasn't the one who should be worried. The next morning, my lawyer and I went to bank. The fraud department had already reviewed the documents. Every transfer had been made using my online access. But the electronic records showed something important. Most of the transactions came from devices inside my son's house. That was the first crack in his story. Then we visited the police. I never imagined I would walk into a police station to report my own child. I almost turned around. But then I remembered my late wife. I remembered 43 years of hard work. And I remember my son trying to throw me out of my own home. I filed a report. The officer looked at the evidence and said something I wasn't expecting. "Sir, this appears to be a very strong case." I didn't feel happy. I just felt tired. 3 days later, Mark showed up at my house. This time he wasn't smiling. He looked terrified. "Dad, can we talk?" I stepped outside. "What is it? You went to the police?" "Yes." "You can't do that to your own son." I stared at him. I couldn't believe those words were coming from a man who had stolen from me. "I didn't do this to you, Mark." He ran his hands through his hair. "You don't understand. If this becomes public, I could lose my job." I looked him directly in the eye. "You should have thought about that before taking my money." For the first time, he started crying. Real tears. "Dad, please." Part of me wanted to hug him. He was still my little boy. But another part remembered something. He never cried when he stole my savings. He never cried when he threatened me. He never cried when he tried to force me into a nursing home. He only cried when he realized there would be consequences. Then he asked the question that changed everything. Can I at least move into the house for a while? We're struggling. I actually laughed. He looked confused. Why are you laughing? Because after everything he'd done, he still thought he could have a house. I took a deep breath. Mark, I don't own this house. He blinked. What? I never did. What are you talking about? The property is in a family trust. He looked completely lost. What does that mean? It means I can't sign the house over to you. His face turned white. No. It also means you can't force me to leave. He took a step backward. No. I nodded. Your mother protected this house years ago. For several seconds, he didn't say a word. Then I watched something happen. The realization hit him. All of his plans, every scheme, everything he had been working toward, gone. You knew, he whispered. I found out recently. He looked like he might collapse. Then he said something I'll never forget. I thought this house would solve everything. There it was. The truth. It had never been about helping me. It had never been about concern. It was about money. Just money. A few months later, the case finally reached court. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, electronic signatures, transfer histories, witness statements. My son eventually agreed to a settlement to avoid a longer legal battle. He was ordered to repay a large portion of the money. He also lost his job shortly afterward. I didn't celebrate. There were no winners. A father lost his son. A son lost his father's trust. The hardest part came after the trial. I went home and sat in my living room. The house was quiet. I looked at an old photograph of Linda. I swear I could almost hear her voice. I told you to protect yourself. I smiled. You were right again. A year has passed since then. I still live in the same house. I planted flowers in Linda's garden. I spend my mornings drinking coffee on the porch. Life is peaceful. As for my son, we barely speak. Sometimes he calls on holidays. Sometimes he doesn't. People ask if I regret reporting him. The answer is no, because growing old doesn't mean giving people permission to use you, even if those people are family. And if there's one thing I've learned at 71 years old, it's this. The people who think you're weak because you're old often forget something very important. We didn't survive this long by being foolish. And sometimes, the biggest mistake a person can make is underestimating their father.